we bring in Erik Prince now, former U.S. Navy SEAL, founder of Blackwater, and the founder of Unplugged Technologies. Erik, good to have you back with us, sir.
Nice to be with you, Vince.
As far as I'm concerned, it did seem like a breath of fresh air for Pete Hegseth to be the guy who's being considered for this role. What did you think of today's hearing?
Well, I think it's a clear contrast of the problem in Washington, that you have Democrats throwing bombs at this guy who have never served or actively avoided service. And the problem in Washington is you have people making decisions that never have to live with the bad decisions they make. They have no skin in the game.
Yeah.
So you have Richard Blumenthal actively avoided Vietnam service while in the reserves, got 5 deferments. So you have so many people that are the wrong decision makers. And I'm happy for the first time we have a veteran that served in combat, that's had to live with the bad decisions made by senior officers to be actually in a position of authority to make it right. He's right. We do need a return to lethality and merit. That's the only 2 things the Pentagon should be concerned with. The very, very best people, the most qualified, doesn't matter what gender they are, but how good are they at destroying the enemy?
Do you think that would represent a revolutionary change for the Pentagon to focus on that? Because I think most people probably looked at the Pentagon through the years and thought, well, of course, that's what they have to be focused on. They're the American military, killing bad guys. Would Pete Hegseth represent a change?
It's exceedingly dangerous for the American people to assume the U.S. military will win every conflict. We haven't won any war, really, in the last 30 years. We get chased out of Afghanistan, having spent hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, defeated by largely 25 to 30,000 illiterate goat herders that received no external support in the Taliban. You get pushed out of Iraq by Iranian subterfuge and covert action. We have the major shipping way, the Red Sea, shut off by the Houthis right now, who, incidentally, the Biden administration also pulled off the terror list before they did that. And just today, the Biden administration takes the Cubans off the terror list. So it's a clear contrast of leadership and a very different view of the world. And that may play out as some theatrics in Congress.
Yes.
But it's a very clear paradigm shift, and it could not come soon enough because our enemies are not afraid. Our allies wonder what the hell we're doing. And we have a serious collapse in deterrence, which needs to be rectified. You have a massively overpopulated general officer class. You have the same amount of generals now that you did during World War II. But you have about 1.4 million active duty now. You had 12 million, 14 million in World War II. So in a time where you should have flat, fast digital communications and a lean management team, we have a very bloated headshed, 10 times the size it should be. And Pete Hegseth definitely has his work cut out to slim this whole thing down.
Yeah. And you're right to point out that the very senators who are angry about Pete Hegseth possibly becoming the next Secretary of Defense, many of these people were people who voted for all of the very kind of the quagmires that we've been in through these decades. And even like Elizabeth Warren today, she had this exchange where she was saying demanding that Pete Hegseth swear that he never become a defense contractor in the wake of being Secretary of Defense. But the irony of her saying something like that is she literally voted for Lloyd Austin. She confirmed him. He came right from Raytheon to be the Secretary of Defense. And so, all these guys are talking right out of both sides of their mouths.
It's shocking to see Democrats defending what has been the status quo, which is absolutely failure on top of failure. When you have bad leadership at the top, it causes a true lack of confidence of young people that want to say, yeah, I want to join. I'm willing to sacrifice a few years of my life to go serve my country, to learn something, to gain a skill. And when there's bad leadership, they vote with their feet. And they have been significant cause of undermanning. And that needs to be reversed. So it's Pete Hegseth needs to focus on two things: lethality and merit.
Lethality and merit.
And if we do that, we get back to a direction of a military that serves the United States of America by actually deterring our enemies from doing dumb things against us, bad things.
Yes.
And can do it at a rate that we can afford. At close to $1 trillion of consumption, we cannot afford to spend more on defense, but we can squeeze a hell of a lot of fat away and get a lot more bang for our buck. There's two things a military commander does. They coordinate information and they release energy. Drive that ship from here to there, march that formation up that mountain, or fire that weapon at the enemy. The problem is the cost of energy, the cost of putting warheads on foreheads, of delivering weapons onto the enemy has gotten so completely out of whack in the U.S. military. It's one of the reasons we can't win a war, because our stuff just costs too much and we're hyper bureaucratic, and that whole thing needs to be thinned out severely.
So one of the phrases that kept coming up today, Pete Hegseth used it a couple times, was referring to the so-called valley of death in military contracting, like when a technology comes online and its ability to become something operational in the military, and so many promising technologies sort of fall by the wayside. He seemed to be suggesting that it's a very corrupt process that is not actually yielding good results for the American military and, of course, their effectiveness. What do you think of that pipeline?
I completely agree with that statement. The problem, the entire Pentagon bureaucracy is a revolving door with the 5 super major defense contractors. Back in the 90s, you had almost 100 major defense contractors. The Clinton administration consolidated that down to 5. That's one of the reasons we pay way too much for any of these weapon systems. On top of that, you have a overlayered bureaucracy, procurement bureaucracy, which is far separated from the actual end user, the soldiers, sailors in the field. And so these people in Washington are making decisions based on politics, based on input from congressmen, not based on what the actual end user needs. The most expensive weapon system in human history, the F-35, is I think it's at operational readiness now of 29%. Okay, so we have some major problems from these big defense primes, and with all the small innovation, whether it's somebody coming up with it in their garage or a small startup, it's impossible for them to sell to the Pentagon because the rules are so completely stacked against them. Mm-hmm. That's the valley of death he's referring to, that these folks come up with a great idea, they submit it for field testing, and then they don't hear. And it goes, so they get smashed, bankruptcy, and one of the major primes buys it, and then ends up charging 5 to 10 times what the unit price should have been. Okay, there's lots of cases like that. I mean, the main drone the Navy used during the War on Terror was originally developed by guys that developed it for tuna fishing, but they couldn't sell it to the Pentagon, so Boeing bought the whole company and charged about 5x what the unit cost was before. So there's lots of stories like that. This is a fixable problem, but again, this audience, I'm sorry, Vince, your audience lives off the fat and the grotesque overspending that happens in Washington. And I hope 4 years from now, there's a lot less government money flowing through this area. It would be much healthier for the Republic.
Yes, I just want to offer the caveat. Not the entirety of this audience, but yes, some number of people within the audience are beneficiaries of that system that you're talking about.
No, the counties surrounding Washington, D.C., I do not mean to insult your audience.
Yeah, we have the best audience. They're the guys on the inside trying to break it up. Okay, but as we look at this, in other words, what you're describing is, in Washington, it's always like, well, you can't cut funding to the military. We need every single dollar we can possibly get into the military. What you're saying is actually there's a lot of fat that can be cut. We can save a tremendous amount of money and make the military more lethal, more effective, and take better care of the troops.
Yes. Whether it's when somebody enlists for a 4-year Navy enlistment, the Navy only gets about 1 to 1.5 years of deployability out of that person because there's so much time wasted in the school process.
Yeah.
So there's just fat upon stupidity in these pipelines that any level of efficiency or discipline applied to the system is going to ring significant rewards. I've done turnaround in businesses before.
Yep.
The Pentagon is like one large organism that desperately needs a diet, and it would perform better. Do you want Mark Milley running a triathlon, or do you want a 22-year-old stud, fresh out of college and fit? The Pentagon looks and acts like Mark Milley at that weight class, and the whole thing needs a diet.
That image is vivid. I see it now.
I do mean to fat shame. You have an enormous amount of obesity, even amongst the general officer ranks, and I call BS on it. And Pete Hegseth, as SecDef, should call all of them out and observe their fitness tests.
Yes.
And let's prove. Again, it comes down to leadership, because the lower ranks are maybe held to some kind of standard on the physical fitness tests. The upper ranks, they get people to, it's called pencil whipping. They write in what the answer has to be instead of what it actually is. That is wrong. Leadership starts at the top, and
yes.
If I were Pete Hegseth, I would line them all up and do it right outside the Pentagon for all to watch.
I love that. That's a great idea. I was talking to somebody who's in military medicine recently. He was telling me that that there's a lot of people who are leaving the military getting huge disability payments because they're obese. I was like, really? Obesity is a basis for disability? He's like, yeah. That's crazy to me that you could. So you get payments for the rest of your life because you're fat?
Yes. On top of, we're on the hook for $1 trillion in additional medical payments for Iraq and Afghanistan alone.
Wow.
Yes. It's staggering. The peak cost of medical spending for World War II was not until the 1980s. So that's something we'll be spending on for the next 40 years at least.
It's amazing. So in other words, there's a lot of problems. You talked about kind of the onboarding of new troops, getting them into the military. You got to factor in the amount of time it takes to recover from the trans surgeries too. I mean, that's a huge deal. Of course, I'm kidding, but that's one of these issues. That's one of these issues, though, that is coming up in the hearing today. The left is trying to make a mockery of all of this, but it is legitimate insofar as the military has all of this woke interference going on, and it has nothing to do with actually winning wars.
I was at a dentist today, and I was reminiscent of having to get dental care before going on dive status in the Navy. And if you're the things that military service requires at the leading dangerous edge are real and significant, and therefore safety matters. You can't be diving if you have any kind of cavities, because your tooth can explode when it comes under pressure and it releases. But imagine what trans surgery does to deployability and readiness. So again, all these incremental bad decisions have been made by very unserious people that have no business being anywhere near responsibility or life and death combat readiness decisions.
Yep.
And when the global war on terror started, there was no headcount reduction. There was no house cleaning of old dead wood in the officer ranks. Instead, they were all promoted and have all floated up to the top.
Yeah.
When Marshall took over as Chief of Staff in the Army, September 1, 1939, he immediately started cutting the dead wood because he saw a fight coming. He took over the day that the Nazis invaded Poland. He got the Army ready. That has never happened for the last 25 years, and the bloat and ineffectiveness of our military in many of these theaters is the clear indication of that problem.
And General Marshall was responsible for the plucking board, removing each of these guys from the top. And there's been some chatter.
Lots of generals and lots of colonels, and it desperately needs to be done now.
Yeah, there's been some reporting that President Trump is considering that. I hope he considers that very seriously. That could be very good for us. In the meantime, Erik Prince, thank you. Really appreciate your insights into this important topic. Always good to talk to you.